So today we're looking at taking off the sill. First of all, we're going to take off the sort of bulb section that comes out the outside part of the car, and then we're going to take off the strengthener plate inside, and we've got the inner step sill to remove as well. We're using the air chisel. We're going to see how we get on. I've already cut one line, but actually wasn't that easy, to be honest, and sometimes chisels are slightly easier, and but it's made a good job so far. So we'll carry on and come back, see how we get on. So I've cut all along the top line and also where the B post comes down, and now we're looking just to end this section out. Oh, look at that lot of rust. So we're going to chop that off. We probably just won't need to use a tool on that. That looks like it would just snap off. So we'll just snap that off and then start working on the inner membrane, which, as you can see, was offering little or no support to the seal. So now that this seal is off and I can see that it's black inside, the chances are this has been replaced at some point. I don't know as yet whether the membrane had been replaced. Tricky to tell, but we should have known really, because if you look at the welding there where the B post comes down, and also just behind the B post, these welds should have been spot welds and they're not, they're plug welds. So that's clearly been replaced at some point. And looking at the membrane, I mean the membrane's got black paint on it, so there's a possibility that that at some point has been replaced. So not quite sure when and why it looks quite like this, because this should have been coated in something to stop it rusting. And as you can see, all the bottom of this is rusted and the top is black paint, so must be been renewed. So we're going to cut across here, because with this cut off then it makes the other part of the sill a lot easier to come off, this bottom part of the sill to come off. And we'll just position this in place, and we can see that you would imagine that that should be cut square, but clearly it isn't, because that's probably why I had so much difficulty in getting the other side on. So it looks as though it's supposed to fit something like that, and that this metal needs to be cut across here to actually match what the car should be. Ashley Hinton it says on here. Must be wrong. Right, so we're going to cut that off across there now and then work further on the back of the sill. So we didn't get as far as we were hoping to today, but we've pretty much removed this part of the section of the sill and the outer part, which is all piled up down there. We're going to cut pretty much across here anyway, so there's no point in moving any further across, and we just need to tidy up this area. I've checked that there's metal here, which is good, so we may have to make an L section like we did on the other side to follow that curve, and then we just need to cut it off from the far end. Prior to doing that, we have made a point of putting a piece of wood here to ensure that when we put the new step sill back in, it's going to fit, and we've also got the A post there which is going to fit onto as well, and we've kept the final sheet at the very end just to make sure that we know where the end of the inner step sill is going to go to when we eventually cut it off. Right, so I've just positioned the inner step sill, the new inner step sill, where on top of the old one, just so I can see where I can cut safely to leave the bit that I actually need left on the end of the sill. So we're going to cut down about this point here. We'll leave a centimetre or so extra that we can, obviously this needs to be moved forward slightly, just by a couple of mil probably, but leave ourselves enough error room. So we're going to cut straight down so we can remove this rusty sill all the way along. We have to cut through the floor and that front panel, and then we can start working on this area here, which is the bit that needs to be put back to full strength. So pretty much all the way through on the front section. Well, I think we're all the way through on the front section, and all we've now got is a small cut here and a tiny cut at the bottom there. We're going to do the top cut with the angle grinder, and it will probably drop down, and then we'll probably have to do the last cut. We should be able to do it with the angle grinder as well, so let's see how we get on. Right, so I've cut through that section. Ah, there you are. I was about to say I didn't want to give it up, but it's gone down. That's it. And now we've just got the cut at the back, which we can do from inside the car. That's about as far as we can go through, just holding on by the tiniest amount, so we should be able to just break that off now. That's it, and it's off. Now we can look about. So I've just positioned the inner step sill in approximately the right place. As you can see, it's slightly long on this end, which we're going to take up with the gap that is on this end when we straighten things up, so those two should marry up. We cut it a lot closer than we originally were going to, just to save a bit of work when we came to. We didn't necessarily want to recut the whole thing. We've also cut off a part of the chassis on this part here that goes onto the bottom part of the sill, the strengthener part of the sill, and unfortunately, if you look underneath the chassis, which is a bit difficult to see, but we've got a hole here, so we've probably got to remove part of this bottom section. We removed quite a bit on the other side, so this is a smaller part, but we may make exactly the same pattern as we made on the other side. So this morning we're looking at the inner step rear sill, the curve section that we need to build, and so we're just going to cut this out, and this is also the strengthener part to the inner step sill rear chassis leg. You probably recognise it from the curve part at the front there. So we've got the two bits cut out as best as we can with the guillotine. We need to go and punch the larger part with a hole punch tool so we can get that curve in there, and then this L section here we need to put onto the shrinker and put a curve into it. So this is the shrinking tool, and what we're using it to do is to curve this piece of metal. So originally this piece of metal was just a straight L section, and what it does is, as you work your way around like this, and slowly but surely, basically what happens is this metal along this edge here is actually scrunched together. You don't actually see it other than a few teeth marks that are left in there as it works its way around, and eventually you'll end up with a curved piece of metal like this. And that's pretty much the right angle, maybe a tad more that we need for this component. So we'll go and check that against the car. and then look at doing these other folds. So on this bit we've actually got quite a complicated fold because it actually curves round here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an initial fold in at this end, and we'll stop shy of the radius here that we need to do, and then the rest of this will probably be done a mixture of this using maybe one or two of these only, and the vise. So this needs to be done in stages, we can't rush into this piece. As you can see, we're starting to get that shape even though we haven't actually folded any of that section at all. So I'm going to take some of these off now and we're going to just work on just one finger. And that finishes off the final fold. So I've had this L section clamped in place, and we've now marked a line just above, and now we need to remove this and then cut slightly below this line with the angle grinder, so that we can look at positioning this L section in. We've also got to remove the other part of the chassis which is underneath, which is what this bit is welded to from the other side, and we're going to be using the pattern, this item that we made, this bracket that we made, to go on that other side. And so we're going to be cutting along this edge down around the seatbelt cover and then off to the floor. So just in case we weren't sure whether this was the right thing to do, because we were cutting through pretty solid metal, as you can see from this edge, and the underside only had a small, the underside of the chassis only had a small hole in it, but this is what's behind all of this. This is what's actually inside the chassis, and actually now that we've gone that far and bent it down, you can actually see the hole is actually slightly bigger than we thought, and it's not going to be up until about this point up here where the metal is actually going to be reasonably solid. So after not being 100% sure whether we should be repairing the chassis part of it at all, it's obviously clear that we should have done, and we have. So we've cut this piece off completely now. We also cut along the bottom line of the chassis, which is actually quite thin, so it's just well replacing it. And we also didn't like the look of this piece up here, which is the lip on the top of the chassis, so we've cut that off, so that also needs to be replaced. Now we have to make sure that the inner step sill is exactly the right length so that we can cut this correctly. Once we've done that, we can then look about fitting this part in exactly where it should be. Right, so the end of the chassis leg has been prepared now. So there's metal all the way around, hopefully you can see. And we've cleaned up inside here, and also we've cleaned up underneath, which you probably won't be able to see. Oh, you can see underneath. That's all now metal. That's going to be sprayed with weld through spray. We've got a bit more cleaning up to do inside, but we've checked that there's metal there, so it's all good. We're going to spray that with weld through spray. We've also cleaned up this area here, ready for the lip to be put back on, or a new lip to be put back on. So these two components are now being cleaned up, and they're covered in weld through spray, so if at some point we can't get to anything, at least we know it's been protected. And this is now the view down the end of the chassis, so you can see it's all now cleaned up, ready for the new parts to go back on. So we've got this strengthener positioned as best as we can at the moment. What we need to do is put a few tack welds down and ease it out at the bottom. As you can see that there's a gap there, whereupon the metal needs to be twisted, but we can use the leverage of the material underneath and the car itself in order to be able to get that right. So I put a few welds across the top, and now I'm going to put a few welds down the side, and then we'll look across the bottom, but probably prior to doing that we're going to need to bend it out just so it matches the seatbelt bolt, which, as you can probably see from the video, it's still quite a way off. So I've put another couple of tack welds down, and as you can see it's now coming in true as far as the seat belt holder is concerned, but it does twist this end slightly, but that can be retwisted back quite easily, so we'll do that once it's fully welded. But that's pretty much it for getting it positioned correctly. Now we just need to seam weld it. So that's now fully welded, and we'll do a bit of cleaning up, but not too much, because the more weld we leave on there the stronger it will be. So now we've got some weld through spray on that, because we won't be able to get to it after we've done the next bit. We're going to put on the L section that we curved up before, this section here. Right, so that's pretty much positioned in place, and once again we'll put a few tack welds down because some bits are fitting better than others and it just needs to be curved slightly, which we can do with a bit of leverage. So we're just going to put a few tack welds down and make sure it's positioned exactly in the right place. Right, so now we're going to run along with a stitch weld. And to avoid any distortion, I'm now going to move up to here and leave this to cool slightly. So that's now welded up, and now we need to bring the chassis part here up to this lip. Right, now that's pretty much pulled up in place, and now we can just pop some those plug welds in now to hold it all together. And we might put a few welds on the front edge as well. So that's the plug welds done now, and it's all rubbed down, ready for some paint to go on. So we've just got the lip at the top to do, and then we can look at fitting the inner step sill. And I've also just ground down the plug welds underneath here, so that when we come to put the suspension, front suspension mount in, it will sit flush on this. So we're just guillotining the template that is going to allow us to make the indentation into the inner step sill. We've just cut the two sides, we just need to cut the radius now, which we're going to use a 10mm hand punch. And this steel is actually quite thick, which is the same thickness as the plate that's going to go over it on the inner step strengthener. Right, so that's pretty much the shape. We'll just clean up these things with a file and then we'll come back. So we've now got the sill clamped in place. And if you look carefully you can see the metal underneath lifting it up, where this gap is caused by this piece of metal now missing, and now we can now hammer this section similar to this shape and it will sink down and we should form the top of the sill. So hopefully you can see now that's pushed down and we've got a position now for the strengthener to fit into. So although it's a bit tricky to see, we've now got the sill positioned in place pretty much where we think it needs to be. When we look at this end here, which we haven't replaced this panel as yet, it's meeting up at the right point, pretty much exactly right. Meeting up on the A post, and then looking down here, we can see that it's meeting up with the chassis repair that we've done. So we're going to work on this a little bit more. We're going to put the floor in just to check that 100% everything is correct. But before we put the floor in, we've got to nibble all the way around the outside of the floor, because it comes with a 20mm lip all the way around, which actually causes it not to be able to lay flat. So we've got this inner step sill lined up with the end of the chassis, whereupon it was cut and remade earlier, or repaired earlier, and now we're just going to put quite a large weld down to make sure that it stays on this end, but just a tack weld, and then we're going to go to the other end and fit the castle section and all that, just to make sure everything's going to fit when we finally do it. So I put a couple of welds down, and now we're going to fit the castle section just to make sure everything's going to fit. So I've now positioned the castle section underneath. However, I'm not quite sure that it's 100% right, so we need to attach the inner step sill to the castle section, just in a few points, just a few tack welds down, and then we'll remove the clamps from this end, which is actually stopping us putting the floor in, and once the floor goes in, then we'll know whether it's correct at the end or not. So I just thought I'd give you a quick update. So we've got welds all the way along here now, all the way along, and we've done the weld on the very end up there. We've still got a bit more welding to do, but that's pretty much it joined on now. So today we're looking at putting on the end of the castle section, and a few welds and straightening up of some of the welding around here, because the inner step sill is not actually bent as a right angle, so we've had to put several clamps on and attempt to straighten it best as we can, and then weld it on. So that end is now fully welded on, and what we've done is we've also put on, just temporary, a fit just to see if it's going to fit on, is the diaphragm part. We've also done the plug welds on the top there, and the additional weld which you can just about see through that bracket, and some of the welds underneath that need to be done, we've done those as well on the cross member. So it's probably a bit tricky to see, but this has all been now painted black in the inside, apart from the edges that we still need to weld to, and they're going to be resprayed with weld through spray, as the top edge hasn't been sprayed with that as yet, and we've yet to put this lip on. So we've got to repair where the top of the inner step sill, part of the chassis really, actually comes up to the inner door panel here, and we're going to actually make this unusual shape just to put in here, and we're going to actually weld it to the lip and to the top here in one part. Normally this lays over the top, but it doesn't fit very well when it does lay over the top, so we're going to actually join it here and onto this edge. So we've made this piece and it's looking a bit like how it is, and so we're going to put a few tack welds down and then try and weld it in place, probably from the inside as far as the right angle is concerned, but to the inner door part or on this side. So now that's fully welded on the inside and also the outside. You can see where some of the welds have come through from the outside, but that's all sorted now. So that's pretty much ground down now. We'll have a look when we put the diaphragm on, just to make sure it's okay. If not, we can knock it back a bit further. So the internals of the sill now have all been recoated again with weld through spray. We have got a bit of paint reaction going on with the hammerite that was inside, but as that was previously painted with weld through spray, then hammerite, then weld through spray again, and it was already painted black in the first place, so I think we're okay. We've rubbed a bit off. So I've temporarily positioned the diaphragm on the inner step sill, and we've got a bit of lining up to do. I think it's all because this inner step sill wasn't bent to a right angle in the first place, and it's left us with a few problems. So what we're going to do is now take this diaphragm off, then measure every inch or so just to make sure that it is I think it's 5 or 5.5 inches from top to bottom, and then we're going to have to weld on a few of the welds and then maybe jack it up if there's any twisting of the inner step sill, just to make sure that it ends up being right when we're finished. Right, so we pretty much stretched it to the right dimension, so it's 5.5 inches across everywhere. However, because of the wave of the top of the sill being wrong, not folded correctly, we're going to have to pick off a few of the top welds where we've lined it up perfectly, as I'm showing you here. Let's move the light away, it might be easier for you to see. So I've lined it up perfectly within that weld. I'm going to drop that weld down and then work our way along the top, and then we can use the bottom, we can then jack up the bottom of the diaphragm to actually stretch the sill to make it the inner step sill to make it perfectly level, because when you come across this side you can see it's very far down, but requires jacking up, but there's a shallowing point in the centre of this sill, inner step sill, which is the fold being wrong. So that's now been fully plug welded on, 118 plug welds on this side. So we've got a bit of cleaning up to do before we can look at fitting the outer sill. So that's all the plug welds been ground all the way down on the diaphragm. So we're going to get some paint onto this, and then when that's dry we can consider fitting the outer sill. But what we might do before fitting the outer sill is actually fit the floor. So it's positioned in place. We've got a bit of weight on that end just to pull it down a little bit, so it's a little bit slightly buckled, so once the welds go down obviously that will hold it all in place, but this might be the next job. So we've just fully welded the so we've just painted the internals of the outer sill part, and also we've painted the section that it's going on to with weld through spray. So once we make these two together, then we should be able to drop a few welds down and then fix it on permanently. So we've started welding on the outer sill, and we welded it first to the A post straight down, and then we've started to put a few welds here and there along the top. So we've got some welds on there, and we've also done, as you can see, three of these welds on the top of the seam, and these are going to be doubled up, so they're going to be quite close together when we're finished. So now it's fully welded, plug welded, and these welds across the 3 sheets of material on the top, all the way down, and also underneath, which we jacked up to get a good fit. So we've got quite a bit of clearing up to do, and then we can get some paint on it. So all the plug welds have now been completely ground down, and we've also ground these seam welds at the top, and also tied up the A post, and also behind it where the splash panel is going to need to go on.